he made us a promise that the gates of hell would never prevail against our most holy Catholic Church.
These are Catholics that are working within the church, and they feel like the church has abandoned them.
If a child is being abused by somebody in the church, get that person out.
They're scared. They know that we have stuff and we're working and we're going to expose it.
The rapist comes through the window with a ski mask. The priest comes through the front door with a collar.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jim Hummel. Instead of waiting on the Diocese of Lafayette to release the list of accused priests it first acknowledged 15 years ago, KATC has published our own list. Quite simply, we think the public has a right to know. You know some of their names, like Gilbert Goethe, the first priest in the country convicted in the clergy's sex abuse crisis, but there are others you may not know. In 2014, KATC started by putting together a list of priests who have been accused of sexual abuse. Our reporters and producers then scoured thousands of pages of documents, all public records, to find support for these accusations. To make our list, the person had to meet one of 4 requirements. The diocese has settled a lawsuit against them. A religious group announced they faced credible accusations. They were arrested or publicly announced by law enforcement as being under investigation, or they have pending criminal or civil suits on file. The majority have never been convicted. Their cases often handled internally by the church and never referred to law enforcement. Often a settlement was reached and the victims would not go to police. That means many of the priests never had a chance to defend themselves, and their accusers never had an opportunity for justice in a court of law. Right now on katc.com/thelist, you can read the background on each priest, and we'll have more opportunities to look at the list coming up. But first, Lafayette was ground zero for the church sex abuse scandal in the 1980s, and now, all these years later, the scandal continues.
We hope to gain credibility with our people. We hope to gain their trust that the church is moving forward, that we're dealing with it in a forthright manner, and admitting our faults and mistakes, and that we're striving to do all that we can to protect children in the future.
In 2004, then Bishop Michael Jarrell first acknowledged a list of 15 who faced credible accusations of sexual abuse involving children. KATC uncovered a list of at least 36 clergy. Jarrell would later say he saw no purpose in releasing their names. Through our investigation, we found similar stories of priests abusing children, telling them it was God's will, and the shameful cover-up by church leaders who moved abusive priests who would go on to prey again on children. There's Mark Broussard. He was convicted in Calcasieu Parish, but has accusations against him in Cameron and St. Landry parishes. We've uncovered a new document where Broussard tells church officials he tried to tell the bishop in Calcasieu about what he had done in 1988, but when he started telling the bishop, he says the bishop put him under the seal of confession. What members of clergy hear in confession is kept confidential. Broussard is now serving time at Angola. Then there is retired priest Gerard Smith. We obtained his personnel file. Smith was accused of sexual abuse in Calcasieu, Lafayette, and St. Landry parishes. A church memo indicates he fathered 2 children in Cankton.
You know, no one believed us because the priests were almighty, the bishops were almighty, the cardinals knew about it.
One of his accusers, Roy Touche, a former altar boy at St. Anne's in Youngsville. Touche complained about Smith at least 3 times.
They just didn't want to do anything. All they did was cover them up, they were shielding them and moving them from state to state to different dioceses. And, it was just like an organized crime.
KATC Investigates uncovered the church knew about the allegations against Smith as early as 1982. In 2010, a diocesan review board under Bishop Gerald found at least one of the allegations had, quote, a semblance of truth. There is no indication the diocese ever reported the allegations to police. State police only got involved in 2015 when Touche filed a criminal complaint. State police found the evidence was credible, but old laws prevented prosecution.
In the 60s, the statute was very clear that aggravated rape was the rape of a female. The same conduct with a male was not, yes, it's unfortunate, but I'm duty-bound to follow the law.
They need to come out there and let the public know who these priests are, who the pedophiles are, so the public can have their own opinion of what they need to do.
When I was abused at 12, I froze. Now I am able to fight back.
The boy in that photo is Tim Lennon. A clergy sex abuse survivor himself, Lennon grew up to become the president of the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, or SNAP. On behalf of fellow survivors, he's called on the church to release the names of accused priests.
An overwhelming number of victims of child sex abuse never come forward. So when you have a disclosure such as you did, this provides an opportunity, maybe for the first time, for survivors to see that they're not alone.
Lennon is also pressing the state to take action against the church.
The problem is they control the information. And without a statewide independent investigation, without subpoena power and compelling testimony under oath, it's the bishops to decide what kind of information is presented.
In a statement, Attorney General Jeff Landry said, "The law of the state of Louisiana does not give me, as Attorney General, the authority to take a prosecution from a district attorney without their request, or to launch a statewide prosecution against a person or group."
Well, my reaction is to be creative. In other words, in some states, we know that there can't be a grand jury like Pennsylvania, but we can do something like New York, where there's a partnership between the local district attorneys and the Attorney General of the state.
Despite knowledge of the list, as far as we know, no law enforcement agency nor district attorney has pressed the diocese to release their names.
The list of 15, are you requesting that list from the diocese?
No, I've not requested it. Again, like I said, until I have a victim with a complaint, I'm not sure what purpose it's serving.
Because there's this list of 15.
The church determined.
Right.
And their own deal. And they
But
have
shouldn't they be investigated?
Well, they did their investigation.
This day, they could be living near schools, they could be living near playgrounds. Do you think it's in the public interest for those 15 names to at least be released?
Well, again, whether that was done or not, the question is they've not been convicted criminally. Your burdens of proof may be different. I mean, I don't know that the church in their investigations are required to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. We are.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end.
Scott Payton is a deacon in the Diocese of Lafayette, but first and foremost, he's a father.
Lead all souls to heaven, especially those in most need of thy mercy.
For years, he celebrated Mass with Father Michael Guidry, the man now accused of molesting his son.
And that's the difficult part, because Guidry hid behind the Roman collar. He used that to hide behind, to gain our trust, to gain the trust of our son, and then he abused that trust, and he manipulated our son, and he manipulated our family to violate our son in a most horrible way.
Deputies say Guidry confessed, but he's now submitted a written plea of not guilty.
As Catholics, we have put a lot of trust in the men who are running the institutional church, and those men have betrayed our trust.
The day of Guidry's arraignment, Deacon Peyton prayed a rosary, joined by his wife, friends, family, and fellow clergy.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy
They prayed for all affected by clergy sex abuse.
By doing this, not only are we helping our son to heal, but for all the other victims who can't do this on their own, and now can see that there are people praying for them because they can't do it alone. This is just much too difficult.
My faith is strong. I believe in the Catholic faith that was given to us by Jesus. The focus, in my opinion, has not been on Christ. When the focus is on Christ, you follow the truth, and you can't go wrong with the truth.
Father Guidry is one of 3 priests removed from ministry over sexual abuse allegations in 2018. Reverend Jody Simino was placed on leave over allegations of improper behavior with minors more than 30 years ago. The allegations from when Simino was assigned to St. Anthony's Church and St. Edmund High School in Eunice and St. Anne's Church in Youngsville.
On September the 18th, 2018, about 3 weeks ago, I was informed of an accusation of sexual abuse of a minor by Monsignor Roby Robichaud.
Monsignor Roby Robichaud. He's facing decades-old allegations of sexual misconduct by at least 2 women.
I wanted to know the truth about what occurred or did not occur.
But the initial accuser went to the diocese in both 1994 and 2004. Despite her accusations, Robichaud was allowed to stay in ministry, work in schools, and was even promoted within the diocese to the post of judicial vicar.
So many times people will come to me in confession and say, Father, I still feel angry. I still feel the hurt. I still feel the disappointment in being hurt by so-and-so.
When Bishop Gerald learned of the accusation, he consulted with the Holy Office in Rome, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. The initial accuser was 16 when the alleged abuse happened. Canon law would have considered her to be an adult, civil law a minor. Bishop Gerald sided with the church.
I am deeply sorry that this has happened to any child of God who has been abused by a priest.
3 months after that news conference, the diocese finally reported Robichaud to New Iberia Police, saying it was at the victim's request. But police may not be able to build a case. The statutes of limitations were much lower at the time of the alleged crimes.
Well, there's 2 issues. There's really 3 issues. There's civil lawsuits, there's criminal prosecutions, and then there's the church rules, right? And what we want is those 3 arenas to work together to minimize the risk to children. So
Ken Levy is a law professor at LSU. We asked him what happens when the church becomes aware of old complaints. By law, members of clergy are mandatory reporters.
It's very fact specific. When the clergy is made aware of ongoing abuse, if the abuse is already passed, the way the laws are written is there's really no legal obligation to report that.
So although members of clergy are mandated reporters, he says those state laws are limited to current and ongoing abuse.
Where the legislatures really need to think hard about revising is with the mandatory reporting. The state has to be the one to deal with this. It can't be up to the church. And right now, the laws are written in such a way that they still give too much deference to the church.
Whether a violation of church policy or state law did or did not occur, there is a woman who reported an allegation of sexual abuse against a priest, and nothing was done for 14 years. KATC spoke with Robichaud's initial accuser. She says in 1994 and in 2004, Both Bishop Flynn and Bishop Jarrell were presented with the same information. She questions why more wasn't done before now.
With faith in our Lord Jesus Christ and with love of God in my heart, I do accept the pastoral care of the people of God in the Diocese of Lafayette.
Bishop Jarrell was installed as the 6th bishop in the Diocese of Lafayette in December 2002 as the church sex abuse crisis was unfolding nationwide.
Gilbert Goethe molested an awful lot of kids.
I know he'll do it again. I could probably guarantee he'll do it within a month.
Already a familiar scandal in Lafayette, the diocese promised reform.
The church is moving forward, that we're dealing with it in a forthright manner.
But under Jarrell's leadership, there are now questions if that promise was kept.
The answers for them.
Bishop Desautel, do you agree with
Bishop Desautel,
Jarrell's
thank you.
decision?
As we said, we will not be taking questions, and this ends our statement. Thank you for being here.
A logistical thing. On September 18th, he had said that there weren't anyone.
No more questions, Jim. I'm sorry.
That news conference was 15 weeks ago, raising new questions about openness and transparency in the Diocese of Lafayette.
It is my duty and my distinct pleasure to welcome especially His Excellency the Most Reverend Douglas Desautel, our new shepherd. We are blessed indeed.
Since his installation in 2016, Bishop J. Douglas Desautel has had to address 4 cases of clergy sex abuse. In 2016, when child pornography charges came out against Father David Broussard, Bishop Desautel held a news conference and took questions.
As soon as we knew something happened, we wanted the word to get out to the priests of our diocese and also to the media, to you guys.
Same in June 2018, announcing accusations against Father Michael Guidry.
At this time, I'm glad to entertain any questions that anyone might have for me.
But in October, acknowledging accusations against Monsignor Roby Robichaud, Bishop Desautel refused to take questions.
As we said, we will not be taking questions, and this ends our statement. Thank you for being here.
A logistical thing. On September 18th, he had said that there weren't anyone.
No more questions, Jim. I'm sorry.
The media was instead asked to submit questions through email, and we did. Was Bishop Jarrell's handling of the case appropriate? Is there any accountability? Does Bishop Jarrell have a statement? 15 weeks have passed since those questions were submitted, still no answers from the diocese. In November, accusations against Reverend Jody Simoneau were announced in an emailed statement. No news conference, no opportunity to ask questions.
Is that openness? Is that transparency?
No, of course not. And again, the reason he does any kind of announcement or transparency is because he's compelled to do.
KATC has learned at least one other person has now come forward with allegations of sexual abuse against Simoneau. The man says he was inappropriately touched by Simoneau starting when he was around 11 years old. While Simoneau was training to be a priest, he says it continued after Simoneau was ordained. He writes, being from a Catholic family, priests were holy superstars. The attention made him feel special and honored. He came forward one day after seeing Simoneau was placed on leave. The diocese praised his courage and bravery. He says they offered to pay for counseling, but he hasn't heard back. At the accuser's request, the complaint was forwarded to police. The case closed because of the statute of limitations. But the new complaint was never disclosed by the diocese, a break in previous policy. For example, when a new allegation surfaced against Monsignor Robichaud, the public was notified.
The church in general has to expose it, address it, and deal with it, or else that's the scandal. It's going to continue, and that's what leads people away from the church because they see the cover.
Transparency and openness, so concerning for some Catholics, they formed an anonymous group, the Society of St. Peter Damian, active online, vowing to expose institutionalized corruption in the diocese. One of its members now coming forward. Quinn Hebert is a former seminarian in the diocese.
Really, clergy not stepping up and doing their duty. St. Peter Damian, our patron, was very outspoken. He was a priest and very outspoken. We don't see that amongst the clergy because it is not our place, really, to be doing this. And yet, we've been forced to because those whose place it is refuse to act.
Is this institutionalized corruption?
Absolutely.
How so?
It goes from the very bottom to the very top. And there's a camaraderie, and there's a camaraderie amongst priests, and it's beautiful in a way. But there's a danger in that because they feel that they have the right to cover up for each other unto the very end.
People might be watching this and you're leveling these, serious accusations against the diocese.
And I don't take that lightly because I know some of these people.
What, in your view, needs to change with the Diocese of Lafayette?
What we have been saying from the very beginning is we need a third-party, non-diocesan, independent investigative board. It seems very straightforward. If they have nothing to hide, then it's no big deal, and it assures the public of that trust and accountability.
The group's demands were even met with a hellfire warning from the bishop.
Yes, we're all going to hell, apparently.
The statement said, slander, detraction, defamation
Which
of
we
character
haven't done. We
are
haven't
morally
done any
sinful.
of that. No, we haven't slandered.
Why would they put that out there then?
They're scared. They know that we have stuff and we're working and we're going to expose it for the good of the church. And people criticize us and say that, oh, you don't have the good of the church. No, we love the church. We absolutely adore the church. We love the hierarchy. We have no intention of usurping the authority of the bishop. That's not our goal. We want to assist the bishop, encourage him to do the right thing.
Playing devil's advocate for a moment, the group is calling for transparency, yet has remained anonymous until now.
Yeah, two reasons why we were initially anonymous was strategic. One, we wanted the information to speak for itself. And then two, there is a concern about retaliatory actions from the diocese. Priests have come to us and said they are scared of the chancery.
Has there been any retaliation?
So far, no, I think. But it has been said that this diocese acts like a mafia. And I know that will freak good Catholics out. They don't want to believe that about the church. People call Lafayette the new Holy Land. But that naive opinion betrays the ignorance of the reality behind the scenes.
Repeated requests for a one-on-one interview with Bishop Desautels have been declined or ignored. The Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People calls for the church to be open and transparent, something Bishop Desautels promised 2 years ago.
We do have guidelines, but it's just common sense that the crisis mode are things like transparency, informing the public, having a press conference. All of those are lessons that we have learned over the years, that this is how this is addressed.
Our request for an interview with Bishop Desautels still stands. Since we published the list, we've heard from several alleged victims telling us about their abuse and their cases that have never been reported. Our team will stay on it, investigating these as they come in. On behalf of KATC Investigates, thank you for watching The List. I'm Jim Hummel. Good night.
The Pope is saying that they were supposed to be held accountable. I haven't seen one in Lafayette Diocese that's held accountable.
And it will never stop until the laity stand up.
It's real important to know that there is help out there and there is life after clergy abuse.
I personally have utmost faith in Jesus Christ and his promise that the gates of hell will not prevail. I don't doubt that. We're going to come through this.
My name is Lisa Strauss. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I do work with some of the victims of clergy abuse. It's really important that you know that there's a lot of help out there, and there are people like me who are willing to help, and there is life after this. There really is. It's not something you will ever forget, so I don't want people to think that, it's gone and la-di-da, everything's rainbows after that, because that doesn't happen. But you will learn how to deal with this, and you will learn how to live with it, and you will feel better as a person. You will. So be brave, take a chance, and get some help.
This week, Catholic bishops from around the world are meeting at the Vatican to address the clergy sex abuse crisis, and they'll be hearing about a case from right here in the Diocese of Lafayette. Father Michael Guidry is accused of molesting a teenage boy in St. Landry Parish. The victim's mother was asked by the Catholic Women's Forum to write a letter about how clergy sex abuse has affected her family. They are devout Catholics. Her husband is a deacon in the diocese. Her letter has been delivered to organizers of this week's conference at the Vatican, and tonight she has agreed to share her message with you.
I am Letitia Payton. I am from St. Landry Parish. I am the mother
of a victim who was abused by a priest in the Diocese of Lafayette.
With 5 pages and 2,800 words,
Dear Pope Francis, bishops, cardinals, priests of the Catholic Church,
Letitia Payton is hoping to make a change in the church she loves so much.
What are you hoping comes of this letter? What are you hoping comes from your words?
From my words, I hope there's an understanding of what the victims suffer and what their families suffer, what their friends suffer, and that it's not something that you just get over.
Shortly after midnight on May 21st, 2018, my husband Scott awakened me. I immediately knew something was terribly wrong, as he could hardly speak through his sobbing.
Life changed for her devout family last year. One of her sons revealed a secret. He says he was molested by the family priest, Father Michael Guidry.
He was counting on our son to never say a word about what he had done to him. Scott served with Father Mike during Mass as the Eucharist was consecrated next to him, not knowing the agony and devastation our son was enduring.
You talked in your letter about your faith and the decision to continue raising your children in the faith. Is that something that you struggle with? Is it something that you've thought of not doing?
Yes, our faith is shaken. Do we doubt? Yes. It's a struggle, but I think the struggles will make us more faithful one way or the other.
You said you're hoping your kids see their mom didn't hide from this.
If I were to hide from this, then my kids' faith would be deeply affected as well. I don't know what the outcome will be. I have no idea. I can't predict the future. But if they can see that we fought for what was right and we fought for justice for their brother, then that's all I can hope for.
It is most heinous when men consecrated for God's work have betrayed a sacred trust to protect and serve innocent children.
Gilbert Goethe molested an awful lot of kids.
I know he'll do it again.
Lafayette was ground zero for the church sex abuse crisis in the 1980s. The scandal haunted the church here and around the world for decades.
Just answer the questions. Put out the 15 names.
The list of abusive priests kept secret until now.
The path to healing and renewal requires that light be shown on this painful subject.
15 years after the diocese acknowledged a list of 15, a review board discloses a list of 37.
Arriving at the disclosure list required a review of some 300,000 pages of material.
How it compares to the list we uncovered months ago, and the questions that still remain.
The entire process of creating this list is marred with a lack of clarity.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jim Hummel. Today, the Diocese of Lafayette published its list of accused priests. 37 members of clergy who have faced credible accusations of sexual abuse involving children. 33 priests and 4 deacons. Right now on KATC.com/thelist, you can find more information about each of the accused, as well as our in-depth reporting, the list that we published earlier this year. In opening its secret archives, the diocese is revealing abuse cases that have never been made public and promising changes, although some of the faithful here in Acadiana still have questions.
The church's response, especially in earlier days, was inadequate and wrong.
Now, for the first time, we see the extent of the clergy sex abuse crisis in Lafayette, where it all began. On the church's list of 37, there are names of priests and cases of abuse that have been kept secret. Many we exposed in January with our own list, but there are 11 priests and 3 deacons whose names have never been made public until now. There are some questions on why certain priests were left off. For example, we found at least 6 priests with credible accusations who served in Lafayette Diocese churches, but because they were under a different order like Jesuits, they don't appear on the church's list. The diocese also didn't include some priests that were already named by other dioceses, or priests the diocese paid out settlements for after a victim came forward. There are also several priests that were publicly accused, but not publicly cleared.
My mother died of a broken heart because of this, because she had knowledge of this.
For some accusers I talked to, seeing these names made public is a validation of their stories and their pain.
It's just unbelievable that this come to this day where everything's come to a closure.
But we're also hearing from some frustrated their alleged abusers were not outed. KETC has spoken with a woman who reported 2 Jesuit priests to the Diocese of Lafayette last fall. They are not on the list. The accuser says it's obvious that this has been a major cover-up, even with some proof of the allegations that were provided. Pictures, letters, cards. What's the problem? The Jesuits won't confirm or deny an investigation into the 2 priests, citing confidentiality.
Rather than listening to survivors of abuse, helping them to heal, and removing offenders, efforts were directed to protecting the institution. That has changed.
According to the bishop, a panel of lay volunteers put together the list, spending 700 hours reviewing 300,000 pages of material, including the files of 802 clerics, that's 623 priests and 179 deacons. Unlike other dioceses in the state, Lafayette did not indicate when the priests served at each of their churches, what the allegations were, when they might have happened, or when they were reported.
They want to give as very little as possible. Lake Charles has so much more information on every priest that they have listed than Lafayette. There's hardly anything on Lafayette. The first page is almost completely blank.
And the volunteer group that helped the diocese put together the list is not being identified.
The problem is that no matter what, the institution is always just slightly ranked higher than the individual. That's the impression that's given.
Quinn Hebert, a former seminarian, is with the Society of St. Peter Damian, a group of devout Catholics calling for change. For him and others, this list isn't enough.
They've said that it's independent. Can't possibly be independent when it was being held in the bishop's conference room.
Other Catholics are calling for more.
No, they shouldn't. They shouldn't be priests anymore.
KETC has uncovered, since being removed from ministry, Joseph Alexander has been able to celebrate Mass in the diocese, and Jules Arsenault has led the rosary at Lafayette funerals. Angered by the church's response to the clergy sex abuse crisis, college student Leanne Dick launched a blog, We the Laity. She says days of doors closing and questions not being answered need to end.
I don't find it very open and transparent because it doesn't seem like they want to talk to anyone.
This list is released on Passion Friday, 1 week prior to Good Friday, the darkest day in history, wherein God is murdered at the hands of us. And yet 3 days later, he rises again. And I think that even though we're in the midst of darkness right now in this crisis in the church, that we will see the sun rise again.
The list was published on the diocese website. There was no news conference, and a request for an interview with Bishop J. Douglas Desautels was ignored. Right now on ketc.com/thelist, you can see our in-depth reporting on each of the priests named and not named by the diocese. They are continuing to encourage victims to come forward. As we head to break, a look at the resources available if you need to report an allegation or if you need help. In 2011, more than 20 years after his retirement, Father John DeLue was removed from active ministry by the diocese following accusations of sexual abuse involving minors. His removal was only made public last week when the diocese released its list of credibly accused clergy, and now we're hearing from one of his accusers for the first time, but also from Father DeLue, who died 4 years ago. He gave a friend documents about the alleged abuse in case the allegations ever surfaced. Those documents indicate the diocese was concerned about scandal and tried to minimize publicity. The accusations against Father John DeLue centered on his time at St. Leo the Great in Lafayette. One of his accusers, Nancy Mouton, tells KATC he sexually abused her and most of her 6 siblings. She says, for years, Father John roamed and groped and grabbed and unbuttoned buttons of our clothing while my dear unsuspecting mother was in the kitchen preparing a feast in his honor. Little did she know he had his feast far from the kitchen. He had unlimited access to all of us. Mouton says she and her family gave depositions to the diocese to Monsignor Roby Robichaud, who is also on the list of credibly accused. She says, we had hopes for justice and even monetary compensation for our pain and suffering. Robichaud told us we would have justice. He lied. After DeLue's name became public, one of his friends provided KATC with more than 100 pages of documents, including his personnel file and correspondence with former Bishop Michael Jarrell, who was bishop when the accusations surfaced against DeLue. Apparently, you do not realize the damage to your reputation that could be done if certain persons decide to bring this matter into the press. That's what Jarrell wrote to DeLue in one letter. In 2011, documents show an effort to lessen any scandal. Bishop Jarrell placed restrictions on DeLue's ministry. He was ordered not to engage in public ministry, but was allowed to say Mass privately and administer the sacrament of reconciliation. He was ordered to have no contact with his accusers. For the rest of his life, DeLue maintained his innocence, even in his obituary, and questioned motives of the accusers. In this letter from the initial accuser, who has since died, DeLue underlined a portion where she wrote, "I will entertain a substantial offer." In the margins, DeLue wrote, "Pay a lot and I will stop." In a letter to Bishop Jarrell in 2013, DeLue compared his plight to Jesus, writing, "I am having my own Good Friday. For nearly 2.5 years, although innocent, I have been falsely accused, made to suffer, being condemned and punished, robbed of any priesthood." For years now, the church has been suffering from the consequences of clerical child abuse. Certain bishops shielded guilty priests to avoid scandal. In May of 2013, Bishop Jarrell responded, writing, "The restrictions on DeLue's ministry would remain in place." He said, "Please be assured of my personal concern for you, despite the unfortunate cross that has come into our life." There is no record the allegations were disclosed to the public nor law enforcement while Father DeLue was alive. We've reached out to the diocese to see if Bishop Jarrell's handling of the case was appropriate. We have yet to hear back.
Former St. Landry Parish priest Father Michael Guidry serving a 7-year prison sentence for molesting a teenage boy. Guidry was sentenced today after pleading guilty last month to molesting a teenage boy, the son of a deacon who had worked at St. Peter's Church in Morrow. Guidry was sentenced to 10 years hard labor, but a judge suspended 3 years, citing Guidry's age, he's 76 years old, and that he had a clean record before this case. Our Jim Hummel was in court today for sentencing, joining us live in studio with reaction from the victim's family. Jim.
Marcel, it was an emotional day in court for the family, nearly 1 year after their son came forward about the abuse. The family is calling today's sentence a victory, not just for them, but for all victims of clergy sex abuse. Oliver Payton walked into the St. Landry Parish courtroom with his family. Michael Guidry, the former priest who molested him a few years ago, followed shortly after.
Anything you want to say to the family?
We'll say that in court.
Inside court, there was emotional testimony. First, from Oliver's dad, Scott Payton, who called Guidry a wolf in shepherd's clothing, patiently waiting to devour the flock. Oliver's mother, Letitia, fighting back tears, spoke directly to Guidry. "Satan is a master at deception," she said. "You went too far with the wrong family." And Oliver's older brother on the stand said, "My brother and I have been best friends for 19 years. I stand by him. He stands tall and proud. He is not weak. He is an Easter person, a person of light and new life." The brothers then hugged in court.
We're especially proud of Oliver for having the strength and the courage to come forward, knowing what he would have to endure to do that.
In court, we also heard briefly from Guidry. "I'm very sorry for the things that happened," he said. "I know what I did was wrong."
That was very
Shallow.
very unemotional apology, and he didn't even face my son.
Before issuing his sentence, Judge Alonzo Harris said, "Certain things in life we just can't tolerate. One is sexual abuse by a priest on our children."
He didn't have to do what he did, but there is forgiveness, because if we want healing, we do have to forgive.
Guidry was taken into custody right after today's sentencing hearing and then taken to Avoyelles Parish. As for the Payton family, they still have a civil lawsuit pending against Guidry and also the Diocese of Lafayette. Live in studio, Jim Hummel, KATC TV3.